This lesson will introduce, describe, and provide examples of frequency, duration, and latency data collection methods. First, let's talk about frequency recording. With frequency recording, we are documenting the precise number of times the target behavior occurs. In other words, we are counting every instance of the behavior. It's extremely important to have a clearly defined target behavior prior to collecting frequency data. This way, we avoid mistakenly counting a behavior multiple times. For example, let's say we're working with a student who bites peers and adults within the school setting. How do we record one single instance of biting? Is it once the teeth or mouth loosens that an instance of biting is over? Or is one instance of biting defined as contact between the student's mouth and the body part of a peer or adult separated by 10 to 15 seconds before another instance of biting can be recorded? It may be difficult to collect frequency data with behaviors such as biting that have unclear starting and stopping points unless we have a really clear operational definition in place. Let's talk more about what frequency data collection may look like in school settings. Frequency recording can be thought of as a tally system. Put simply, we tally the number of times our target behavior occurs during an observation session, and, at the end of the observation session, we document the total number of tally marks. Typically, your observation sessions or data collection sessions do not last the same amount of time every time you observe. For example, you could record 15 instances of calling out behavior during a 45-minute observation session, but then, the next day, you only observe for 15 minutes and the student only calls out 10 times. If we don't put this into context, it might look like the behavior is improving. For example, our student only called out 10 times today, while yesterday he called out 15 times. Really, however, the observation periods are different in length. So, what we often want to do is report frequency data as a rate. For example, 15 callouts during a 45-minute observation period would be 0.33 callouts per minute, and 10 callouts during a 15-minute observation period would be 0.66 callouts per minute. Considering rate when analyzing our data helps us to assess student progress more accurately, as we're looking at the number of callouts per minute across observation sessions, instead of the frequency of calling out behaviors across observation sessions with different lengths of time. Next, let's talk about duration recording. With duration recording, we are finding out exactly how long the behavior lasts. Sometimes, collecting duration data accurately and consistently is easier said than done. For example, a student might frequently engage in physically aggressive behaviors when he was given a task demand, and you might be the one giving the task demands. The student might frequently try to bite, scratch, kick, and spit on you when prompted to complete a task within the school setting. And as you can imagine, it's really tough to collect duration data when those behaviors are going on, because you might think, well, you just have to start your stopwatch when it starts and stop it when it's over. But you're also trying to maintain the student's safety, as well as your own, and it can be really tough to remember to start that stopwatch. And so sometimes, accurately collecting duration data is easier said than done. Let's discuss the steps involved in duration recording. You can use a stopwatch, a cell phone, or whatever else you have that can measure time. When the behavior starts, we start the clock. When the behavior stops, we stop the clock. And then at the end of the session, we record the total amount of time the behavior occurred. You should find an average amount of time that the behavior occurred by looking at every instance. So let's say Jason was out of his seat 10 times for 40 minutes out of the 50-minute observation period, averaging 4 minutes for each out-of-seat incident. You can provide the total amount of time Jason was out of his seat, as well as the average duration per occurrence of Jason's out-of-seat behavior. Both of these are examples of duration data collection. Here's an example of duration recording in action. Let's say that we have a student engaging in thumb-sucking behavior, which is socially stigmatizing for the student in this example, and is influencing the student's social interaction with peers, which is why we're addressing it within the school setting. During a 15-minute observation, the behavior of thumb-sucking is observed 4 different times. And since we're collecting duration data, we start our stopwatch when the thumb-sucking behavior starts and stop it when the behavior stops, and we get 42, 89, 36, and 55 seconds. And we can add all 4 instances together and get 222 seconds, or 3.7 minutes of thumb-sucking during that observation period. But that doesn't really tell us a whole lot. It's easier to convert this to percentage of the total observation period. So 3.7 minutes out of our 15-minute observation period, that's about 25% of the observation period the students spend sucking their thumb. Finally, let's talk about latency recording. When collecting latency data, we are not recording the starting and stopping point of a behavior. Instead, we are recording the amount of time it takes for a student to respond to a stimulus or a prompt. For example, let's say the behavior we're targeting with our students is lining up to enter the school building after recess. If you were collecting latency data, you would say, "Okay, class, it's time to line up for recess," and then start the timer. And then once all students line up in the assigned area, you would stop the timer. And the amount of time between the end of your prompt, asking the students to line up to enter the building after recess, and the occurrence of the behavior you're looking for, in this case, actually lining up to enter the school building at the end of the recess period, that would be your latency data. Here's an example. A teacher asks their class to line up, and 16 seconds later, the entire class is lined up. So, the latency data would be 16 seconds. It took the students 16 seconds to respond to the prompt of being asked to line up to enter the building at the end of the recess period. Here's another example of latency data collection in action. Imagine a student who never wants to go outside when the fire alarm goes off. The goal is to gradually decrease the elapsed time between the sound of the fire alarm and the student leaving their seat in order to walk out of the classroom. In this example, let's say the fire alarm goes off 4 different times over the course of a semester. We can record the time the fire alarm went off, so this is our stimulus, our prompt, and then the student getting out of their seat to leave the classroom would be the response, the behavior we're looking at. So 26 seconds the first time, 37, 35, and 27 seconds the following 3 times. 4 different trials with an average latency of 31.25 seconds. In this case, we'd want to decrease the time between the stimulus and the response, and we could collect latency data to monitor our progress and the effectiveness of the interventions that we put in place to support the student.